Hey guys, welcome back to the Joe Silverback Show. I'm your host, Joe Bunton, and we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of suffering and how that plays out in our lives. I was listening to and reading some different conversations that sparked my interest in sharing my thoughts on this. So reversing, going way back to maybe 30 some years ago, I was involved in in-depth religious studies. I studied a great deal of consciousness psychology in relationship to various religions, and I studied various religious ideologies, mainly because it was interesting to me. It doesn't have to be interesting to you, it was just interesting to me as part of my what I was born with. And one of the things that's, there's multiple things along our lives that kind of stick with us, and those become part of who we are. One of the things that stuck with me was a summary of the Buddha's all life is suffering. And the summary was in relationship to, hey, once you accept all life is suffering, it's all downhill from here. Now today the conversation I was listening to was between some pretty successful Western American guys who were talking about how they got to where they are today, and all of them ultimately said, I'm not a genius, I'm not the fastest guy, I'm not the smartest guy. And they quoted somebody who basically said, I can suffer longer than anybody else. So what does that mean? With the ability to suffer, for those who have staying power, is endurance. Going back to the model of the silverback is just clear. There is no doubt, and staying power is the mark of his great success. And I believe staying power is the mark of success of nature. And that's why nature is my model for human consciousness, and why human consciousness has to find its way back to wild, primitive, primal nature, nature inside, nature outside, to reconnect, absorb for the first time, which I don't believe in, as you know, reconnect the old mammalian brain, the old reptilian brain, reconnect with those parts of the brain where endurance is what determines survival. That's still going on today. In the pecking order of things, we have the fable of the tortoise and the hare. The tortoise and the hare is a comical version of the hare who doesn't really want to do any work and thinks he's so smart and zips on past the tortoise and stops to smoke a joint, or stops to have some raging sex, or stops to entertain himself with a good movie because he really doesn't want to work hard. He doesn't want to suffer. The tortoise just plugs along. This story is as old as the hills, and this is the story that these very successful people were talking about. The staying power, the ability to stay the course through the difficult times and push beyond the 11th hour when everyone else is dropping out. I have a good example with this in my and my brother's family dynamics. There was one of our boys who didn't have the highest level of talent in soccer, but he had the greatest endurance. He had the greatest discipline. He had the ability to find all kinds of ways and techniques to discipline his mind and his body, and especially that part of the body that wants to give up. And so let's just stay with that a little while. If endurance is the outcome of staying through suffering, then let's look at our parenting skills here, and let's look at the role of the man, the silverback, in child rearing. We have become an overly feminized culture. The pendulum has swung way, way, way far to the power of the feminine. I'm 56, and my entire life has been observing the annihilation of the masculine, the annihilation of male aggression, the annihilation of male assertiveness, male dominance, the pretense about patriarchy being something that men just sat around and created. And we can go into those and answer those questions offline if anyone has any, further curiosity about that. And I know that's going to come back more and more and more and more. But the pendulum is swung in a direction where men got confused and lost their way. And a big part of this program for myself as a man, and for my sons, and for anybody else as a man and their sons, and anyone else as an uncle or a friend of any man, is to help bring clarity where there was and has been for a long, long time confusion. So part of the role of the man in the family life is the differential between the role of the woman, who has in her biology the ability to become the mother, and because of the ability to become a mother, she has an emotional attachment, and she has a multi-layered levels of emotion that most men and most women will say she loves deeper than the man. Let's just leave it at that for a moment. My wife says women are just more complex in their ability to love. They have more layers in their ability to love. And she summarizes it in the devastation that she and her girlfriends suffered over her lifetime, that she noticed, where when breaking up, the man could move on much quicker than the woman. This is a generalization, so don't get all hung up on it. But this same ability in a woman is precisely why the balance in the family requires the silverback, the male, who doesn't suffer as much over love, who doesn't suffer as much over their children splattering. Now, God knows that especially as a single father for 15 years, I suffered and have suffered and continue to suffer over my children, so I'm not pretending that. But there is a reality, and I'll give you an example. When my oldest son was 10 months old, I had trained him when we go on walks. He's on my shoulders. I had trained him to hold on to my hair. And back then I had more hair. We grew up at the seashore, and nature was a part of our primal education. And I loved the ocean. So at 10 months old, his mother sat at the seashore watching as I took her 10-month-old into the ocean, wrapped around my neck, learning to hold on to my hair, and rode the waves with him. Now, one time, he fell off, bloop, 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 and I reached down and I grabbed him. Now, that's something that a man, by his nature, has the ability to do with the children because he doesn't have the same kind of emotional attachment to suffering that a woman does. Just think about that for a little while. Let that settle in. Give me your own stories. You all have them. The studies on men in relationship to roughhousing with children, especially men roughhousing with boys, is paramount to the psychology of the silverback that we are hoping to achieve. I remember as my children were growing up, and I have four of them, we had four of them, and especially as they were getting, one or two of them, into their early teens, there's this cockiness that happens, and I took all of my children out into the closest wilderness place to our home that I could, and trust me, it was pretty primal. Nighttime is primal in any wild nature place. So I took them with me and walked really fast ahead of them. And the purpose of me walking really fast ahead of them was to have them gain some consciousness about their dependency upon me as their provider, protector. And why was that important? Well, that's important because in our culture today, we're trying to flatline and make everything horizontal so that parents and children have equality. And instead of the evolutionary history of consciousness where there's the vertical, upward, hierarchical viewpoint. And there's nothing like nighttime in a canyon out in a little bit of semi-wilderness. I say semi-wilderness because it wasn't like we were in Yosemite. But it was still pretty out there, far enough away from lights and traffic and cars and city that they clung to me. They clung to me. And when we finally sat somewhere, we all huddled together, and I didn't say a word. This was not a conversation. This was a test of mettle, and a test that made every one of my kids understand that I was the silverback, and I was able to endure more than they were at this time. Endurance is the other end of suffering. Suffering is an inevitability of life. We either suffer and gain more towards our goal, towards our purpose, towards our direction, or we suffer at a plateau that we have accepted. Regardless of what level of achievement you or your child or anybody wants, suffering is a part of it. And the sooner that any parent, and I speak more powerfully to you men, and as men, the sooner that you as men stop trying to be women, stop trying to be the mother, you will get closer to your role and your purpose as the silverback, as the one who sits calmly, understanding that fear is something that's internal and that suffering is something that can be endured and overcome in different levels of achievement and success. Okay, that's it on the silverback today. I've hit the 15-minute mark. It's actually 16 minutes, so I'm trying to be conscientious of dividing up an hour into 4 pieces. Okay, we'll get into this more, trust me. Comments, stories, shared books, shared YouTube, all that stuff, guys. Everybody's interested in being a part of the conversation and learning how to share our experience. Okay.